All right, so this next domain is the identity and access management, sometimes referred to as AIM or IAM. Sometimes you hear people talk about it from a perspective of identity, credential, and access management. So ICAM. And I think that it's really the glue of everything that is in corporate America. Really, anything that we do on a network evolves around or revolves around identity and access management. And in this domain, as we go through and begin to look at some of the topics that this domain has to offer, it's important for us to recognize that the methods and the technologies that we use for identity management are very, very important. One of those is going to be Active Directory. So if you don't know enough about Active Directory, I would encourage you to spend a little bit of time and learn about Active Directory. Not only will it help you pass the exam, but in my opinion, more importantly than passing an exam, yes, I am saying that out loud. More importantly than passing this exam, the knowing Active Directory really will help you understand how the whole process, if you will, of identity management happens. One of the things that you can look at is not only the resources that we have on our YouTube channel, but the resources that are on the Cyber Ninja. And one of them specifically that we put together, because usually this is a deficiency for many students, that they don't feel comfortable about Active Directory. So we created a video about Active Directory. It's less than 10 minutes. Once you go in there and watch that, you hear some of the common vernacular. It starts to probably engage and make you a little bit more curious. So what I would tell you is it's probably going to make you have more questions, which is a good thing, because the more questions you ask, the better understanding that you have of something. And in this case, Active Directory really is the guts of modern day corporate networks. So we're also going to be jumping into talking about authentication methods, different types of models, as well as ways that we can audit and monitor accountability to those access controls. And in addition to that, how some of the different identity components have come to life based off of really laziness. And in my opinion, that's kind of where we are in today's world. We want things now. If we can't have it now, then we don't want it. We'll go somewhere else. And why do I say that? Well, having the capability to be able to have open authentication and use one login as a single sign-on for a myriad of different sites that are out there really helps to bring to life a shared way that we can authenticate and create credentials to different sites that are out there, so we don't have to memorize a ton of different identities. And I say that because not only is open authentication much more accepted now more than ever, but federation between companies is starting to and will continue to grow as not only Office 365 and Microsoft 365 continues to dominate the corporate America authentication and identity management services, but as we start to or continue to partner with companies all around the nation and around the globe. So one of the cornerstones of the information security is controlling how people access resources on the network. Are they authorized? Can they modify? Can they create? Can they delete? And different types of controls that we put in place are super important. If you take a look at the NIST Special Publication 853 series, some of the most difficult things to implement and some of the most time-consuming things to implement are access control. And if you just take a look at that framework specifically, the majority of time-consuming controls that must be identified as compliant or not applicable, majority of those controls are time-consuming to implement. And I say that because some of the more physical access control components that we'll talk about in this domain, really, I think a lot of people understand those because of the things that we do in our home lives. And I say that because people know things like gates, guards, and guns. We know how to protect not only ourselves at our house, but our family. So we have a general idea in the physical security sense of what access controls are. But when we start to converge those physical security access controls with more of a logical security, then some of the underlying technology needs to be understood and brought to the surface. So by doing that, we go back to that onion approach of the defense in depth or layered approach that we talked about on day one when we were going through and doing that practical exercise for Fort Knox. You may recall that. So when we jump in and start to talk about this access control component here, this is one of the things that we'll need to enumerate, the physical and logical convergence of access controls. We get into some discussions on the managed services, which is very important nowadays, and how to provision accounts as a key word in here. You'll hear people talk about being able to provision identity management solutions to customers. So we'll talk about what does that mean in the context of information security and the applied science behind anything dealing with identity management. So keep that in mind. So let's address here at a high level some of the physical and logical access to assets. In a physical sense, we usually refer to physical access control as the gates, guards, and guns. Gates, guards, and guns. And those types of access controls are usually more familiar to us than others that are out there. And I say that because not to placate in any way or downgrade the physical sense of it. Rather, it is the most important, if not right up there at the top, if somebody could argue that it's not as important. Human life safety and being able to physically protect people is of utmost importance, not only for corporations, but if we're at the ballpark, we're driving, we're at our house. It's all about protecting ourselves, protecting the ones we love, the people that are around us that we come in contact with. So being able to do that is very important. And I say that because a lot of times people overlook how important that physical access control is. So let's take a look at that before we jump into talking more about the information assets, the different systems that we have, and the different devices that we have. So with some of the physical components in the access control, you may refer back to the holy trinity of information security. So from a facility standpoint, we still can apply our famous CIA triad and be able to talk intelligently to apply the security controls to the principles of physical security, but also logical security. And a lot of times, if you talk to people that are in the physical security world, they usually will lean on past performance or best practice in the industry. One of those practices is in your book. It's called the CP CPTED. And what that means is, let me go ahead and write that on here. That means crime prevention through environmental design. And so, when we're thinking about a site or a location physically for facilities, and we are evaluating maybe 3 to 5 different sites that we may be interested in growing our business, or moving from one location to another, or if we're in our current location and we want to just sure it up and lock it down the best that we can. There's things that we can control, and there is a method for the madness about how we can control physical security. And if you've ever done any, or if you know anybody that's in law enforcement, typically they've gone through some sort of crime prevention through environmental design course, and it really makes sense. I remember the first time that I heard about this and started to want to become a little bit more curious and find out additional information about it. To me, it was enlightening because how you can funnel people into certain areas of a piece of property, or control how people move within a given building is pretty neat if you think about it. And I say that because this CPTED really is kind of interesting. And let's go ahead and see if I can create a whiteboard here. All right, so you should now see on the screen a whiteboard. And I'm going to go ahead and draw some things here. Okay. So the first example here that I kind of want to just go ahead and see if we can have a good conversation about is, being a sports fan. I think about one context here is, let's say you're going to some big arena like a football stadium, and this is going to be my drawing of an awesome football stadium, so hopefully you can appreciate that. So that's a football stadium. Usually what you'll see is controlled access to that football stadium. So maybe they'll have a long drive or an esplanade here that is flanked on both sides by holly bushes, or thorny bushes or something on one side, or maybe on the other side it has some a brick wall or something on the other side. So when people come out to or in the parking lots here of the facility, they park and they see these thorny bushes, chances are favorable that they're not going to want to deal with those thorny bushes and try to cut through somewhere over in the thorny bushes. Chances are favorable they're going to see those and then come over to a follow the herd or the masses down the corridor, instead of over in the periphery and jumping through a bunch of things that may scratch them or cut them. So just a clever technique that usually you'll see planned out by urban regional planners, that actually it helps with making sure people flow properly through, in this case, a stadium, but it might also, in some case, prevent crime in some way. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we take, for instance, your neighborhood Walmart. Let me just draw a Walmart here, and you just got to go with me here in my little quick and dirty 3D model. Get rid of some of these things. So we talked about the football stadium there. Now I'm going to talk about Walmart and how the CPTED works for somebody like them. Okay, so I spread it out a little bit. It looks great, or at least I think it does. Keep your comments to yourself about my drawing here. So we'll come in. Sugarfoot, come on. So people can come in this way, they can come in this way, but essentially now they have a big parking lot that they can go in and check out. Well, inside the parking lot here, what Walmart will do is they will strategically place lighting inside of here to do a few things here. So I'm trying to draw a 3D model. Just bear with me as I kind of build it out here. And this 3D model for lighting will give the Venn diagram of coverage for the parking lot. So, or at least in real world it should. In my drawing here, it's not the scale, but essentially I'm trying to show you that each one of these lighting is strategically placed in the parking lot, so there's no dead zones inside here. In order for me to do that in this particular drawing, I would have to construct a couple of other light poles, right, to help myself and get the proof of, or the point across here. I would construct a couple of light poles here and put them in the middle, and then I could have my my Venn diagram. So something like that, something like this, and then in the parking lot they have full coverage of lighting, so there's no dead spots, right? So there's no way that people could, at nighttime at least, feel like they are not safe. And you know, maybe they do anyways at Walmart, but that's a different story. What in addition to that we typically will see is on top of each one of these poles, what Walmart will do is they will also mount little cameras, and these could be 360-degree cameras that are mounted on each one of these poles that help them troubleshoot in case there's any issues, you know, and give full video coverage. In addition to that, they'll also mount up here on the top of the building and around all the sides to, so they mount all these these are supposed to be cameras, guys. Just go with me here. And strategically, they will put the cameras in positions that they know people are going to come in and out of the building. So in our case here, when they come in and out of the building here, the camera, this camera right here, could be directionally looking this way, but also this way. So it can be looking that way, and it also could be looking this way. And then this camera over here would be helping or assisting the monitoring, as well as looking at the parking lot, and it could be looking the other way. So it kind of gives you a 360-degree view. This one over here could be doing the same thing, right? So it's looking at the door, or maybe you mount a couple of them here, and then this one's kind of, and so all around the entire facility, what they do is they'll have all different kinds and ways that they will try to be able to force people to do what they feel is the way that they want you to do it. And in this case right here, is people come in to the facility, there might be an arrow that only is a one way for people to drive down this row, you know, one way arrow for people to drive down that row, a one way arrow for people to drive down this row. Now, whether or not people actually will do that, that's a different story. And so, you know, in the outside of the facility, they have it literally covered. And that, you know, they've been sued enough times over, you know, the 1,000 years that Walmart's been in business and all the companies that they bought along the way. They've been sued a bunch of times to the point where they want to not only protect you as a consumer And with the various laws that are out there, as an innkeeper, they actually have to do something to try to protect you. But in addition to that, they want to protect themselves and have a record to show, in fact, that they are doing their due diligence to try to protect you. So the crime prevention through environmental design really comes into play here with this facility. And some of the logic that's behind that could certainly be applied in your facility, or maybe your church, or somewhere else you go. It really is kind of neat if you think about it. I had a police officer or retired police officer that was in one of our boot camps not too long ago, who said that when they received their training on an annual basis through this crime prevention through environmental design, what they found is that they were trained to look for broken windows, or lights that are out, or chains around fences that had been broken and down on the ground, or the little kind of the devil's in the detail for some of the controls that were supposed to be there, but in fact, it's missing now. And it could be an indicator. We talked about intrusion detection system throwing up an alert. Well, from the human standpoint, just being able to pay attention to the details and to be able to have your eye trained to recognize some of those issues would alert you in a way that says, if you're a police officer, at least what he said was that if they saw something and there wasn't an urgent matter that needed to be covered, they would stop, they'd get out of the car, they'd kind of, pull the flashlight out and kind of look around to see why was that window broken. Maybe they would, after they would investigate, they would go park around the corner and just sit there to see if somebody 10, 15 minutes later would come out of the building. So those are things that law enforcement is trained to, but also architects and urban and regional planners try to do that as well. And so crime prevention through environmental design helps with physical controls to hopefully protect the patrons, but also protect the access to the facility. Now I'd like to go in and talk a little bit further about the some of these other things as well. All right, so let's keep the party going here. The different types of controls. Let me start over here. With access controls and some of the different layers of that onion that we talked about, the level of sophistication comes into play. And obviously, if we talk about the physical security standpoint, those are going to be physical controls that we're going to put into place. Some of the more or less technical controls, like policies and procedures, are going to be administrative controls. Whereas the things that we will need an expert level of understanding in order to implement the controls on networks of today, or the different systems of today, those would be more of the technical controls. And from that, the concept of being able to have all of these different controls together holistically will make the sum of the whole much more secure. And hopefully, as we talked about on the first day, we're baking these controls into the project implementation. So it doesn't necessarily have to be applied for just a facility and then we're done with it. This can be for a weapon system. This can be for an application. This can be for anything. We want to make sure that we have the appropriate controls in place to keep the honest person honest. And a lot of times, that's exactly what we're looking to do here. And so for our purposes, what are some of those controls, and what do we need to do in order to ensure that we're implementing those correctly? All right, so as we jump in and talk about the ways that we can identify and authenticate people and be able to manage that, it's very important that we first identify um, a saying or an acronym that usually you'll see in the identity management business. So that is the, write it up here, IAAA. The IAAA. And the IAAA for our purposes is going to be identification, it'll be authentication, it'll be authorization, and accountability. So why do I mention that? Well, it's important for us to make sure that you understand how this works. And so in the chat window, if you would, I would like for you guys in the chat window, which comes first? And don't do it to everybody, just do it privately to me. Which comes first? Authorization, authentication, or accountability? So what I'd like you to do is in the chat window, put those in order of how they will happen when you try to use a network. All right. So the reason why I say this is because I have people that take classes. Again, we only offer the CISSP 4 or 5 times a year here, and I have people that come through that I think don't understand the process of it. And for me, the process of that don't understand the process of how identity management works. And for me, it's kind of like I always think about when you've been pulled over by a cop. And if you've never been pulled over by a police officer, then you are lucky. But the first thing that the police officer will do after you get the nervousness in your belly and in the throat, you start saying, "Oh my gosh, what did I do?" Well, he or she will walk up to the car and they'll say license and registration, please. And you give them your license and registration, right? So the first thing that they want to do is they want to identify who you are, and then they take that identity back to their car, or maybe if they have a little handheld device, they can look at it right there. But they'll take the identity back to their car, they'll type it in and authenticate you against the government system that all the law enforcement agencies utilize. And because of that, typically what we will see, or not typically, every time what we see, is the process is you identify, then you authenticate, then you are authorized to do things on the system. And if you look at it like that, where first you come in, you need to provide credentials, so your user ID and password, right? That would be a typical identity that would be assigned to you in a non-CAC environment, your user ID and password. So after you provide your user ID, you have a challenge of a password to authenticate you. And once you're authenticated, then you go on to system and you're able to see what you're authorized to see. All the while, even before you're authenticated, there will be a log being created for accountability purposes, for auditability purposes. And because of that, a lot of times what we see is the IAAA implemented in modern day identity management systems. So I say that because a lot of people don't understand that authentication comes before authorization. Authentication comes before authorization. And it's important that we recognize this. If you're not as familiar with some of these terms, I kind of look at it from a sports memorabilia collector standpoint, or if you like to collect whatever. I oftentimes equate it to this, and hopefully, this story or this example will resonate with you. So I have a friend who is very well connected, and this friend has always been that go-to person in my life, that if I need something, anything, if I need anything and I can't get it, I go to this guy, and this guy gets me what I need. And so recently I went and met with this person over at their place. And when I went and met with them, on the wall, I walk into their house, and on the wall, right when you walk in, front and center, there was a Kobe Bryant jersey that was very well mounted on the wall. Very well mounted on the wall. So it was like a Riker mount for a Kobe Bryant jersey. And immediately my buddy put it there deliberately to catch, sports fans' eyes. And, in my opinion, one of the top 10 best basketball players of all time, if not even the top 5, Kobe Bryant. But I see the jersey, and I immediately ask a question. I'm like, "Whoa, that's awesome, man! Tell me a little bit about that." And he says, "Well, it's from the All-Star game when he was MVP in, I don't remember the year, but he told me the year, and it's signed." And immediately I was like, "Wow, that's awesome." So me being the person that I am, and I've been collecting stuff all my life, sports gear all my life, I immediately am looking to see if there's some sort of certificate of authenticity. And, I don't see it on the front. So I take it off the wall, and I'm turning it over. He's like, "Man, what are you doing? What are you doing? Be careful, be careful." And so I said to him, I was like, "Well, where'd you get it?" He said, "Oh, I traded some dude for a Callaway Big Bertha driver." And I kind of look at him. I'm like, "Really? I mean, come on. You traded somebody for a Big Bertha driver for a signed Kobe Bryant MVP All-Star jersey? Somebody was willing to trade you a Callaway driver for that?" And so I was looking for that certificate of authenticity. And it turned out that he didn't have one for that. And one of the shows that I like to watch is Pawn Stars. You may have seen that on the History Channel. At first, when I first started to watch that show, I started to think to myself, how in the heck is this related back to history? Why isn't it on the History Channel? Well, as I watched episode after episode after episode, it truly is. I mean, really, it is quite awesome, where people bring in whatever, and then you didn't even, as a fan of the show, and probably those guys as the owners of that store, they probably have never seen the majority of that stuff before. So they know maybe a little bit about it, or the history of it, and can tell a story about a Civil War item, or maybe a particular firearm that somebody brings in, or maybe some sort of ancient weapon that it's been in the family heirlooms forever, or a stamp, or a money or coins or whatever. But they don't trust their gut. The store owner doesn't trust his gut. So what does he do? He calls in an expert to authenticate it. And these experts, that's what they do. They come in with their big Inspector Gadget magnifying glass, and they're looking at, if it's a signature, they bring in 10 different signatures that have been collected over the years for a particular person, and they see if the the ink has gone a certain way. If it's a coin, they say, hey, the previous three of these types of coins looked this way, and this is how much they sold for. But essentially, it's a way to do what we call in the business a 1-to-1 match, or a ratio of 1-to-1, and I'm writing it up here on the screen that I'm sharing, a 1-to-1 match, or it's a way for us to verify or have verification for an identity in this case. And if we can do a 1-to-1 match, what we have on file in the identity world, what you're providing, if we challenge you in what you're providing to give us what we know to be authentic on file, and you provide us with that, we have a 1-to-1 match, and you are verified or authenticated to get onto the network. And so, the same way with these certificates of authenticity, you have experts that really spend their entire life in one little subset niche area to become an expert in whatever. And based off of that, for me, if I'm dealing with something that's expensive, I'll pay somebody an hour worth of time to come in and vet that for me. I'll spend $250, $500 if I'm spending a maximum amount of money on something, to have somebody come in there and vet that product for me. So same thing if you're getting ready to buy a car, you want to have a mechanic look at it and see if there's anything wrong with it. And the same sort of thing whenever we're going through and authenticating to the network. So I know that was kind of labor intensive there with the IAAA, but hopefully that makes sense. And really what it comes down to is we can implement identity management in a number of different ways. And usually we will identify a person or a subject, which is a user, a program, or a process. That user, program, or process, after they've been identified, can be properly authenticated. Usually they provide a second piece to the credential. So something like a password, a passphrase, a key of some type, a PIN, a token, multi-factor authentication, something along those lines. And after that, then they are authorized to get onto the network. And because of that, a lot of times what we typically will see is a flow of identification, authorization, or identification, authentication, authorization, and then access to a resource, and then accountability or auditability to that resource. And so in your book, the way it works is, the identity comes in, you're authenticated, then you're authorized to a resource on the network, and everything you're doing is being held accountable or showing non-repudiation through some sort of access control log or some sort of logging mechanism, an audit mechanism. Sometimes we see issues, and I mentioned this before. One thing that we sometimes will see is something that's called a race condition. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I'm going to mention it again, is, it depends, and you probably have seen this through your career using different types of systems. When different processes are being carried out, a race condition can happen when there's a shared resource. And a lot of times, SharePoint has gotten so much better over time. But I remember, having been an expert in SharePoint since 2003. teaching it for UAH and Calhoun Community College as an expert level in the teaching of it. There was a time when SharePoint would have a race condition where two people would be jockeying for an artifact or a document at the same time, and I would be editing a document that's out on SharePoint while you would be editing the document out on SharePoint. So we're both editing it at the same time. I save my document and close it out there, and then you save your document and close it and overwrite my changes to the document. So a lot of applications, when they were first being developed, they're first being implemented at a scalable approach like SharePoint for an enterprise organization. That was a big problem that they had. And a lot of times what ends up happening is we try to make sure that we check things in, we check things out, and apply certain types of logical access controls to certain items that are out there. So keep that in mind as you're going through and seeing some of these things. You'll probably see that come up very, very often.